Hi everyone, welcome to Deception Detection Radio. I'm Kay.
And I'm Chad.
We pray you all had a blessed week. Tonight we are welcoming a very special guest, Zen Garcia. Zen is the author of 10 books and is also the webmaster for the truth-seeking network, FallenAngels.com. Zen is executive producer for Endeavor Freedom Incorporated, executive producer for Endeavor Freedom TV, and chairman of the board for Multiple Choices, an Athens, Georgia area center for independent living. We would like to welcome our brother in Christ, Zen Garcia. Welcome, Zen.
Thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate the opportunity to join with you and your listening audience to discuss all things esoteric and go down the rabbit hole in trying to help people to decipher the illusion parading as reality.
That sounds good. We really appreciate you taking the time to come on. I'm going to go ahead and say the opening prayer, and then we'll get right into it. Are you ready, Zen and Chad?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Dear Heavenly Father, this has been a wonderful week. You have given us so many blessings. Thank you for bringing us all together tonight and our listeners. And we thank you so much, Lord, for all you do, for standing with us when we go through these difficult times, and for showing us just your power and your glory in everything that we see and we do. We do it all for your glory, Lord, because we love you. We love you so much, and we give you praise for everything because you loved us first. Please place a hedge of protection, Lord, around all of our listeners, around Zen, Chad, and myself, and open the ears of the listeners so that they may hear your word and soften their heart to have your words go into their heart, Lord, that they can keep them. Please let your word touch everyone and lead tonight's broadcast, Father. I ask you this in Jesus' holy and mighty name. Amen.
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 Zen, welcome to Deception Detection Radio. Could you please tell our audience a little bit about you if they're not familiar with you?
Yes, but let me first inform you that I'm no longer working as an advocacy director with Endeavor Freedom. I do still am involved with the nonprofit, but I have since turned it over to another board, and I'm not currently the chairman of the board for Multiple Choices as well.
I
Now
apologize.
just no, it's just those are hats that I did wear when I was greatly involved in the political system, but since having learned basically that the whole two-party system is contrived and that elections are basically fabricated, I've decided to put my efforts more into exposing that kind of deception and focused on writing books and doing radio programs, which is what I endeavor most of my time with now. And that being said, I am the author of 9 books, but I'm working on my 10th one right now. And I also do 2 radio broadcasts, one on Wednesday evening, 8 to 10 p.m. on Revolution Radio, which can be found at freedomslips.com, and one on Saturday, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern on truthfrequencyradio.com. And my books, the ones that I have available, I'll mention the first 2, Look Somewhere Different and When the Evening Dies, but those are sold out. And my third one, A Different Way of Being. My fourth, Lucifer, Father of Cain. My fifth, Awaken to the New World Order. My sixth, Sons of God, Who We Are and Why We Are Here. My seventh, Skyfall, The Angels of Destiny. My eighth, The Palestinian and Aramaic Targums. And my ninth one, The Flat Earth as Key to Decrypt the Book of Enoch. And the one that I'm working on now is The Firmament, the Vaulted Dome of the Earth.
Nice.
Yes, they all sound interesting. Well, Chad, I know that you had some ideas where you wanted to start tonight. would you like to go ahead and take off with that?
Yeah, I was hoping that maybe Zen could start out talking a little bit about the whole pre-Adamic and lead us into the serpent seed.
Yeah, sure, because they actually tied together, and they are both keys for unlocking so much that is hidden within Scripture, in my opinion. Um, and so, going back to the pre-Adamic age, I think we should first start with the worn heaven and the passages within Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, which speak about the earth being without form and void, and that when you look at the Strong's Concordance meaning of tohu wabohu, which are the Hebrew words for without form and void, it basically is describing the earth being a ruinous heap. And so something had led to the earth becoming a ruinous heap. And individuals like George H. Pember in his book, The Earth's Earliest Ages, he ascribes in similarity to uh, a belief that within those two verses there is what is referenced as the gap theory, which basically asserts that there was a previous era, a time, an epoch which had occurred before the earth became without form and void, and that something had indeed led to it becoming destroyed in the manner um, that is presented within that verse, and that what is described afterwards in Genesis 1, 2, and forward to Genesis chapter 2 is the recreation and the reformation of the ruined earth. And so it also mentions in chapter 2 that there was a time when there was not yet rain, and there was not a man um, created to till the ground. And in my belief, in what I'm currently writing about, is that in Genesis chapter 2, it's a flashback to this previous age, and that there are other verses like Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 23 through 28, I believe, where Jeremiah describes um, a time when there was not yet man, but all these cities of the wilderness were destroyed by the fury of the Most High God. And also in Ezekiel chapter 26, in the latter portion, describing the destruction, the judgment that is going to be brought upon the city of Tyre, both the mainland city and also the island city, New Tyre, which is about a mile or so off of the mainland, and it's an island out in the sea. It describes in that passage how they will have a judgment brought against them where the island will be destroyed and drowned and will no longer be able to be found. And it attributes that destruction in similarity to something that had happened to a previous seafaring people, and that in a very olden time, and that in my mind it seems to connect to the mythology of Atlantis and the destruction which was incurred in Atlantis, which drowned it and made it disappear so that it could not even be found even to this current day and age. Even though there are megalithic structures which are being discovered in places like in the bottom of the ocean, like in Cuba, there are pyramidal structures being cited as being located and discovered there. Places like Yonaguni off the coast of Japan, which is a huge megalithic site, which has been well explored, that but is at the bottom of the ocean. And another place off of the coast of India called Dwarka, which in the Hindu mythology was a city that was drowned and disappeared over 30,000 years ago. And the fact that they are at the bottom of the ocean is also affirmation to how long ago these events and these cities had to have been constructed, because this was at a time when the sea levels were very much different than they are now. And so if science is correct, and that there was a glacial age, and that when the earth began to warm up and all of that ice melted, that's what resulted in the sea levels rising. um, However it was that it occurred, those cities had to have been constructed at a very long time ago, at a very advanced age, going back into the past, because they are located at the bottom of the oceans, and that the oceans now have inundated them and drowned them and kept them hidden, um, until recently, in even just the last few decades. And so there are also other structures which are being discovered. But all of this, in my mind, is evidence to um, judgments that were levied and brought upon the rebel angels, and that what even led them to be banished here to the earth was that there was this previous war in heaven, and that this is when Lucifer, as it says in Isaiah chapter 14 and also in Ezekiel chapter 28, he wanted to exalt himself above the stars and clouds of God, um, to to take the throne of the Most High God and to be like the Most High. And that this is, in my opinion, the moment which iniquity was found within him. And in the second book of Enoch, the book of the secrets of Enoch, it mentions his being cast out of the heavens on what is the second day, which I think is very relevant and is something that I'm writing about even right now in talking about the firmament, because according to Genesis's order of creation, the first 4 days, when you go and you study um, the description of the creative process of how the earth and the heavens came into its current state and form, on the first day, with the earth being null and void, or being without form and void, it is reestablished as foundation. And then on the second day, the firmament is spread across its breadth. It divides the waters from above from the waters below, and it's established as a dome, a canopy, a heavenly curtain, and fitted to that of the circle of the earth, as described in Isaiah chapter 40, and also in Proverbs chapter 8, where it talks about a circle being inscribed on the waters of the deep, and that this is the earth as a flat circular plane, and that this is the structure which the dome, which is also referenced or inferenced as being a solid structure. That when you look up the word firmament, it comes up as the word rakia, which means a solid vault, arch domed structure, a canopy, the heavenly canopy, which was put in place above the earth. And then on the third day, the waters of the deep, um, the mountains are separated, and the earth, the dry land, appears, meaning that the earth is brought upwards from what is sea level, and then the continental land masses appear. And that is the topography for which all of on the fifth day, the grasses, the trees, and all the vegetation take hold upon. But on the fourth day, you have the heavenly luminaries, the celestial luminaries, including the sun, the moon, and the stars, being created and placed into the firmament of beneath the firmament, beneath the solid dome structure of the heavens. And they have their circuit above the earth, as Solomon states 29 times in the book of Ecclesiastes, that all is folly under the sun, and that the sun and the moon and the heavenly stars, they all have circuit and maintain circuit in within the firmament above the earth and around Polaris as the fixed star, as the center point, much like the North Pole is for the plane of the earth. That Polaris is the fixed star for the movement and the motions of the celestials during the night. And so um, this is what we see spoken of as far as the prior times, because when the rebel angels are cast out of the heavens on the second day, they are banished here to the earth, and they are no longer allowed to go into the upper heavens, but they are banned to the circle of the earth. And then it's my opinion that the firmament was established and put into place after their exile here to the earth as containment, as way to prevent them from being able to escape the upcoming judgment. Just as Legion responded to Christ when he cast them out into the swine, they asked him if he had come to punish them before the time. And so they know that they have a certain amount of time left, and that when that time is up, they will be banished. But so they're being banished here to the earth, and this all occurred before the modern creation of Adam and Eve on the sixth day. But so between the second and the sixth day, you have the angels already exiled and cast out, the rebel angels, Lucifer and the 1/3 of the angels of the Most High that joined him in insurrection. They are banned here to the earth with the pre-Adamic humans that were in existence as part of the natural order and the natural creation, with all of the other creatures that were established before Adam and that were placed here to inhabit the earth. And so even in the Sumerian mythologies, you see the accounts of their trying to enslave humanity and to try to, and it's referencing pre-Adamic humanity, but also even now their aspirations are to establish this new world order and to dominate with a one world system um, this, all of humanity, and to enslave us to their whims and their desires. And so this is nothing new. They've been attempting to do these kind of things for a very long time. But anyways, this is why you see in the ancient mythologies the account of all of these old elder cultures and the different indigenous peoples. They have the mythologies of these angelic beings coming down to them from the heavens, because of course they were cast out and then they came down and exiled here to the earth, but they were banished here. But when they came down to these different pre-Adamic peoples, they brought with them the mysteries of heaven, and they utilized their knowledge to assist these different cultures in becoming advanced in ways that can't even be explained now. And they were very busy in building and establishing megalithic sites and all these megalithic structures that we see widespread uh, upon the earth in places even like in Egypt and Stonehenge, and I mean everywhere, Pumapunku, Teotihuacan, all of the megalithic sites. They were busy in leading these pre-Adamic peoples, and also in building them themselves with advanced technologies. And because they were of giant size and stature, they were able to construct utilizing these megalithic sized blocks when we can't even repeat the same kind of the same kind of constructed patterns and using megalithic rocks to create cities that exist even unto this day. And so, which is another reason why you see reflected worldwide uh, the worship of what is referenced in the Bible as the Nakash, which when you understand that the Nakash is not a snake and not just a regular serpent, but that it was a feathered serpent, a winged serpent, a dragon, much like is cited in Revelation chapter 12 when it mentions that that old dragon, known as the devil, that ancient serpent, who deceiveth the whole world, that much of the ancient world did revere the feathered serpent, whether in the guise of Viracocha or Kukulkan or Quetzalcoatl. There is the worship and depictions, like even the Anunnaki. There's images engraved into stone which depict these beings as being winged reptilian beings, much like dragons. And you have the mythology, like in China and other places, of their cultures being established by these dragon entities that came down from the skies and that also were the ones that had seeded the different ruling families, especially like in Japan and Korea and other places, and that a lot of times these families still rule and sit upon the thrones of the world, even to this day and age. But this is what happened in the prior times, what the Egyptians call Zep Tepe, the first times, and what Berosus also gives mention of. And in speaking about the quotes that you can find, which mention Berosus talks about Oannes being the bringer of culture and civilization, that he had taught um, ancient man numbers and language and all of these advanced arts and sciences, and helped them to, do things like farming techniques and domestication of animals, and just really gave them knowledge to advance their cultures and their civilizations. But all of that came at a price. And that price was that the fallen angels established the pagan religions um, around blood ritual and victim and child sacrifice. And so often in the worship of the feathered serpent, like in the case of the Mayans, you see where they instituted very abominable acts of torture as a way to appease their gods. And that many of the pagan cultures, they revere and they worship these deities by committing just atrocious acts against their peoples, or against prisoners of war, or even their children, or certain people were raised to be sacrificed, and they are taught that it's considered an honor to have this thing done to you, which is totally insane. But those are the things that they were able to brainwash those people that they were ruling over to incorporate into their religious beliefs. And so their efforts to enslave humanity and in establishing these abominable religions worldwide is what brought the Most High God to bring and to create his own creature in his own likeness. And that is where we have Adam and Eve coming on the scene, being established in paradise, and then the Lucifer and the rebel angels tempting them and causing Eve to eat fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which initially caused them to lose their immortal bright nature, because the story is a little bit more in depth than what is portrayed and just outright in the Genesis account, because what people don't understand is that, and when you read the extra biblical text, books like the first book of Adam and Eve, or any of the ancient accounts talking about the life of Adam and Eve, they give great detail into how Adam and Eve, when they eat fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, it caused them to lose their immortal bright nature. It caused them to be cast out of the upper heavens, out of paradise, much like the rebel angels were previous to them. And that when they were cast out and the cherubim, the flaming cherubim, was put in place to prevent them from reaching or going back into paradise, paradise is not on the earth that we are living on, this dual plane, where we learn through the knowledge of good and evil. Paradise is in the third heaven, and it's currently the home and the place of residence for the righteous that have already been um, brought up. Like when Christ died on the cross the first time, he went down into Sheol and he freed Adam and the other patriarchs and took them to Michael, who baptized them in the Archersian lake, and then allowed them to enter into paradise. And New Jerusalem is there, and New Jerusalem will, at the end of days, once the judgment ensues and the harvest is reaped, and the wheat and the tares, being the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, are separated, and one condemned and gathered for burning, and the other gathered for preservation, then New Jerusalem will descend from paradise and actually be established here upon the earth. And that at that time, there will be that the earth will be destroyed by fire. There will be a new heaven and a new earth in preparation for Yeshua coming down and actually dwelling upon the earth. The kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord. That those things will happen at that time. But before then, once Adam and Eve were created in paradise and tempted and cast out, once they found themselves in flesh form, that's when Eve is beguiled and impregnated with Cain, who is the firstborn hybrid son of the devil. And this is where we have the tares described in Matthew chapter 13, where Yeshua gives us the parable of the sower, and the parable of the field, and the parable of the wheat and the tares. And he describes an enemy sneaking into the garden, that while men slept, an enemy snuck into the garden and sowed the tares, and that when the children came forth, that then the angels, as the reapers, they noticed that the tares had come up with the wheat, and they go to Christ and they ask him, "Well, do you want us to pull up the weeds, pull up the tares?" And he says, "No, let both grow together until the time of the end. And then at the end of days, he will send the angels out as reapers to gather, to separate the harvest, and again to gather the wicked for burning and the righteous for preservation." And then he goes on in that chapter to also describe the enemy as being the wicked one, which he's tying it to 1 John chapter 3, where it says, "Not as Cain, who was of the wicked one," which he's, basically affirming that Cain was a child of the devil, of the Nakash, and that this is why we see his lineage separated in Genesis chapter 4 from Adam's lineage in Genesis chapter 5. And also why in Luke chapter 3, I believe it's verse 25 through 38, where the lineage of Christ is stated, that it skips from Adam being the son of God to Seth, because Abel, being the firstborn son of Adam, he was murdered by his half-brother Cain. And Cain, not being a child of Adam's, is not included in that blood lineage. And so this is what we have being referenced in Genesis chapter 3 with the serpent beguiling Eve, and why the repercussions, the consequences of her having eaten the fruit from the tree of the knowledge and good and evil, why it is that they covered their genitals, and then why it is that that the repercussions of that was that she would have to bring forth children in pain, sorrow, and Adam would have to work the soil to feed his progeny, and why it is that the serpent is condemned, and the curse placed upon him is that there would be enmity between his seed and her seed, meaning the seed of the woman from the seed of the serpent, which is exactly what is discussed in the parable of the wheat and the tares, where Yeshua says that the devil is the father of the tares. He associates the devil as being the enemy which snuck into the garden, and also the wicked one that had fathered Cain. And he describes this to the apostles after the multitudes are sent away, and they come to him and ask him directly to please explain to us the parable of the wheat and the tares. We know it not. And so, because he's speaking directly to them, he does not any longer explain it in parable form, but tells them outright exactly that Adam and the wheat are the children of the Son of God, and the tares, being the seed of the serpent, that they are in fact the children of the wicked one, and the wicked one is the devil, and that both will grow together until the time of the end, and that with his second coming, when he takes the judgment seat, that then the wheat and the tares will be separated from each other, and then the war, which is ongoing even right now between these two bloodlines, these two seed lines, it will be ended and it will be over. But until then, the seed of Cain would be allowed continuance, and would also make it through the flood and be allowed to uh, continue and be ongoing, that they would not be completely wiped out until his second coming. And so that's what we see reflected in both the pre-Adamic times. The war in heaven led to the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, which would be ongoing until Yeshua comes again for the second coming. And that at that time, the war will be ended and evil will be squelched.
Wow.
Fascinating.
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's really important to understand it this way because, as I said, these understandings are a skeleton key for unlocking so much that is contained within the scripture, and that when you have this understanding as revelation, the scriptures just, it's the greatest story, never told, and
Hmm.
little understood.
Now, I've got a question going back to the beginning. With everything that happened, do you believe that the days were an actual 24-hour period?
You mean like each day?
Yes, until he said that, the light would be for the sun would be for the light, and then we'd have the moon for light at night. Up until that point, there was no separation of day and night.
Right. Yeah, there wasn't, but I do believe that once that did happen and take place, that yes, the day was established as a 24-hour period, because the circuits and the movements of the sun, the moon, and the stars, they were established for signs and seasons, and for our humanity being able to keep track of the passing of time. And so those things were established in that manner in order for us to be able to, like a day is based upon one circuit of the sun, around the circle of the earth. And then you have the week, which is basically 1/4 of the the phases of the moon, even though it's a little bit more than that. Like really a month is according to the lunar calendar, which is a whole other topic, but the average cycle for the moon going through its 4 phases is 29.531 days. And the ancient Hebrew calendar, which was established by the Most High God, when the heavenly luminaries were interned into the underneath the firmament and within the firmament, that he did begin and had passed on to Adam how to keep track of time with the ancient Hebrew lunar calendar, which, in order to explain this, the first day and Sabbath begins with what is called the Kadesh, which is, according to the book of Enoch, a moon which is 7% full, which is a waxing crescent moon. And that this is the first day and the first Sabbath, but it is excluded from the 7-day count of the following 4 weeks. So then you have the first day, which is the first day and Sabbath, that's excluded. Then you have 6 working days leading to the second Sabbath, 6 more working days leading to the third Sabbath, 6 more working days leading to the fourth Sabbath, and then 6 more working days leading to the fifth Sabbath. And so Sabbath actually aligns with the phases of the moon when you understand how to keep track of time according to the ancient Hebrew calendar. And because the phases of the moon actually occur over 29.531 days, the lunar months on the Most High's calendar, they alternate between 29 and 30 days. You have a 29-day lunar month, 1 month, and then the next month you have a 30-day lunar month, and then the following 29-day, and vice versa for 12 months, which gives us 354 days in a year. And then after a few of these solar years, you have an extra month, which fits the calendars back together and aligns them in what is called a metatonic cycle. And so it's really easy to understand and to keep up with what really Sabbath is, because right now those that try to keep up with Sabbath according to the Gregorian solar calendar, because it does not have in part within it the exclusion for Kadesh, because Sabbath doesn't occur every 7 days. It occurs like the fifth Sabbath and the new moon Sabbath, they are often back to back. And so the fifth Sabbath will be back to back with the new moon and first day of the month, the Kadesh, that Sabbath. It's a little difficult to explain, but basically, according to the lunar calendar, every 1st, 8th, 15th, 22nd, and 29th day is a Sabbath according to God's lunar calendar, and those days align with the Kadesh, which is the 7% waxing crescent moon, and then the second Sabbath aligns with the first quarter moon, the third Sabbath with the full moon, the fourth Sabbath with the third quarter moon, and the fifth Sabbath with lunar conjunction. And so it was easy for the shepherds, while they're out there feeding their flocks, to be able to look at the moon and to determine what, where they were according to the lunar calendar, just by visual, which is amazing.
You answered my second question. It's very fascinating. And the Gregorian calendar, to me, as a Christian, it just messes everything up.
It does. And it was purposely done because they wanted, like if you read Jubilees chapter 6, they wanted to confuse everything and also to prevent people from being able to determine when Sabbath occurs, so that they are not able to honor the fourth commandment. And also, unless you are following the lunar calendar as I described it, which I created a calendar to help people to understand how the ancient Hebrew lunar Enochian calendar aligns with the Gregorian solar calendar. And, I have all the Kadeshes and all the Sabbaths for every month laid out in that. Like this month, all the Sabbaths they fall on Monday, because Kadesh actually began on a Monday. And then you have after that every 7 days, the following 4 sabbatical weeks. But it's all important to determine when that Kadesh actually occurs, because that's when Sabbath happens. And because, as I said, it's excluded in the 7-day count on the lunar calendar, you can't just track that Sabbath occurs every Sunday, or like the Jews celebrate it from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. The Seventh-day Adventists celebrate it on Saturday, and mainstream Christianity celebrates it on Sunday. When it fluctuates, it changes according to when a Kadesh occurs, and then how it lines up, with the Gregorian solar calendar.
That makes it a moot point for all the people that argue whether the Sabbath is on a Saturday or a Sunday.
Yeah, it actually can be on any one of those days, depending on when the Kadesh occurs.
Interesting. I've got a question for you.
Sure.
Basically, when Satan went into the garden and committed the act with Eve, this was a direct attempt to create a bloodline that would eventually lead to, when the fallen angels came down, they would be able to mate with the daughters of
Yes.
Cain.
Yes.
It was the daughters of Cain that they came down and mated with. Am I correct?
Right. Yes, and you can find confirmation of this in the Kebra Nagas, which is Ethiopic, one of their most celebrated uh, and revered texts. It's called the Glory of Kings. It's found in Ethiopia, which is also the Book of Enoch is still currently part of, and I believe Jubilees as well is part of their canon. And so it was because of the Ethiopic canon that we have even now the current Book of Enoch, because it was destroyed and disappeared from the collective conscious of humanity until it was rediscovered in the, I believe it was the late 17th, 18th century, somewhere around there, and then restored to the public and to humanity. But yes, absolutely. In chapter 100, which is um, the chapter is called Concerning the Fall of the Angels. It describes how the Watchers, um, being jealous of Adam, and they asked Yeshua as the Word of God to allow them to come down to the earth and to teach humanity about the kingdom. And he tells them, and they also say that they brag about how they would not fall like Adam had fallen, and they would not be able to, they would not be tempted in the way that Adam was. And so he transforms them into flesh and then sends them, allows them to leave their place of habitation and come to the earth. And the first thing that they do is they come across the daughters of Cain basically having a party where they're playing music and tambourines and other instruments are being played, and they're also they had basically dressed themselves up, makeup, and scented themselves with perfume, and they were enjoying an orgy, is basically what it describes in the book of the Kebra Nagas, which means the glory of kings. And then they were tempted and took wives of all which they had chose from the daughters of Cain. And it's my opinion that Genesis 6 could not have occurred unless the beguilement of Eve had occurred previous to it. And another facet of all of that was that the serpent, not only wanting to create his own bloodline and his own children here on the earth to work through, but he wanted to try to pollute the children of Adam, the seed of Adam, as the seed of the woman, so as to prevent Yeshua from coming and incarnating through the seed and the children of Adam. And so he had a twofold endeavor, and he failed, in preventing a pure lineage because Noah was spared and was saved, and the flood was brought upon the earth in order to wipe out the hybrid seed line, the giants, and also the children of Cain. It even mentions in a book called the Second Baruch, which I believe is a Slavonic or a Greek text. It describes 409,000 giants having been killed because of the flood, and that they were, decimated. And then in the book of Enoch, you see that the giants are being led to slaughter one another, and that all of that was told to Noah, and that he was told to prepare an ark because this great deluge, this flood, was coming in order to wipe them out and to give he and his family, because Noah was pure in his generations, meaning that he wasn't corrupted by the seed of Cain or the hybridization which led to the birth of the giants. And being pure in his generation, he and his family were selected to repopulate the earth after the flood. And the slaughter of all of those giants gave him and his family a chance to reestablish themselves without the fear of being, basically cannibalized by the giants who were blood drinkers and the eaters of human flesh.
How do you
Interesting.
think that the giants, the Nephilim, appeared again after the flood?
Well, I covered this in my book called Lucifer, Father of Cain. There's a specific passage, and I'll pull it up, but I am posting a link to the calendar that I created, which talks about the Kadesh and how to determine when all of that occurs. But let me pull up my book. But there's a passage from the Targums which speaks specifically to Og of Bashan being saved through the flood and being allowed to resettle after the flood so that the giants would have memory, and so that humanity would also remember that the giants, being this proud and haughty people, that they had been part of existence, and that the Most High basically went to war and waged war against them and slaughtered them following the flood. But in the Targums, I'm actually pulling it up now, but it makes mention of Og being spared by Noah, and that he was able to ride upon the ark and being fed food by Noah, that this is how he was spared. And which is interesting, because after I discovered this passage, I had read, or actually looked it up in a Google search, and discovered that there were Jewish stories, fables, which also talked about the same thing, that Og had been spared in similar manner. But the Targum says this about Og. And Og came, who had been spared from the giants that died in the deluge, and had ridden protected upon the top of the ark, and sustained with food by Noah, not being spared through high righteousness, but that the inhabitants of the world might see the power of the Lord, and say, were there not giants who in the first times rebelled against the Lord of the world and perished from the earth? And so the Most High basically saved Og as one of these remnant giants, which even in the scriptures it says that Og was the last remnant giant. Um, and in Genesis 6 it says that there were giants in the flood before and after the flood, in the land before and after the flood. And so Og was spared in order that we would know and have basically locked into our collective consciousness and that of our mythology that indeed there were giants, um, in the land, and that they had existed as part of the sons of God, interdicting themselves into the affairs of humanity and taking wives of all which they had chose.
So Og was allowed to survive, and was it through him then that the Nephilim bloodline started again?
Yes, it was through Ham. And the story actually, if you read, because it takes a lot of investigation to put all of this information together,
Mm-hmm.
but basically Jasher and another book called The Writings of Abraham talk about that Noah's wife, his first wife, of whom he brought into the world Shem and Japheth, Shem being his firstborn son, Japheth being second, that his second wife was Naamah, who was the sister of Tubal-Cain, of the line of Cain, and that from that marriage, Ham was conceived. And so Ham had a different mother, and he was of a different bloodline than Shem or Japheth. And that when it mentions after they had settled, and that Noah had partaken of the wine of the field in planting the grapevine, that it mentions in Leviticus chapter 18 verse 8 that the story of Ham seeing the nakedness of his father, that when you look that up in Leviticus, it describes that as being as the nakedness of the father as having sex with the mother. And so, and it also, and I can share this with you as well, because I have this in the same portion of my book, but the results of Ham seeing the nakedness of his father was that the child Canaan was born. And so a lot of people believed or tried to ascribe that whole tale as being Ham having homosexual relations with his father. But that is not the truth of the matter, because um, Canaan was born as a result of Ham seeing the nakedness of his father. And I'll actually read a passage from the Targums which locks this down so that you can understand indeed what I'm talking about.
Real quick, could you
Sure.
explain what the Targum is?
Oh yeah, the Targum is back when the second temple was destroyed, during Jeremiah's time, when he talked about how the people would be exiled into Babylon under the Nebuchadnezzar's rule, um, that they would remain there for 70 years, and that when Darius came to power, he decreed that they would be allowed to leave and to return back to their homeland, and that um, the Cyrus, his son, actually funded and paid for them to return and also to rebuild the temple. But during the 70 years that they were in exile in Babylon, Hebrew became a language which was predominant only to the priests, and I mean the rabbis and the learned scholars of the Hebrew peoples. But the lay people basically picked up the vernacular of the day, which was Aramaic. And so when they returned, um, and the temple was rebuilt and worship was reinstituted, when they would read from the Torah, which was written in Hebrew, they would have to stop and they would have to read in Aramaic. And so Targum means translation. And what happened is when when worship was reinstituted, because the rabbis kept having to stop and to translate the Hebrew Torah into Aramaic, the people wanted, they wanted scriptures to be able to study for themselves. And so the Targums were authorized by the rabbis to be written down, and they are Aramaic translations of the original Hebrew Torah. And what we have, and what I published as my 8th book, is the English translations of those Aramaic translations of the original Hebrew. And so what I'm reading from is the Aramaic of the original Hebrew.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because when you read them, they give great detail, provide further insight into those things that I'm talking about, which I'll share with you also. Another passage, because it covers and tells us in the Targums that indeed the serpent was the father of Cain. And so let me pull that up too, so that I can read that afterwards. Which those are fascinating accounts, and that's why I do recommend that people read the Targums, because, in my opinion, even though I do believe the King James is absolutely inspired, I do believe also that the Freemasons, which compiled it and put it together, had purposely left out portions or changed portions in order to hide certain aspects of the teachings, which, should be obvious to us, but are not. And so let me read this passage first. This is from the Targums about the story of Ham seeing Noah's nakedness. It says this: "And the sons of Noah who went forth from the ark were Shem, Sham, and Japheth. And Sham is the father of Canaan, which is very important, because remember, the results of his seeing the nakedness of his father was that Canaan was born. These are the 3 sons of Noah, and from them they were spread abroad to dwell in all the earth. And Noah began to be a man working in the earth, and began to be a righteous man, and he planted a vineyard. And he found a vine which the river had brought away from the Garden of Eden, and he planted it in a vineyard, and it flourished in a day. And its grapes became ripe, and he pressed them out, and he drank of the wine, and was drunken. And he made himself naked in the midst of his tent. And Shem, the father of Canaan," referencing it again, "beheld the nakedness of his father, and showed to his brethren without. And Shem and Japheth took a mantle, and bare it upon their shoulders of each, and went backward, and covered the nakedness of their father. And their faces were turned back, and the nakedness of their father they did not behold. And Noah awoke from his wine, and knew by the relation of a dream what had been done to him by Shem his son, who was inferior in worth, on the account that he had not begotten a 4th son. And he said, Accursed is Canaan, who is his 4th son. A serving servant shall he be to his brethren. And he said, Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, whose work is righteous, and therefore shall Canaan be a servant unto him. The Lord shall beautify the borders of Japheth, and his son shall be proselytized, and dwell in the schools of Shem, and Canaan shall be a servant to them. And Noah lived after the deluge 350 years, and all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died." Now, I'm going to read really quick a couple verses from about the beguilement of Eve. This is from Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. In the Targums, it says, "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between the seed of thy son and the seed of her sons," which this is, excluded. So it actually references the seed and connects it to her children, her sons, and what would be the sons of the serpent. Now, in Genesis 4, chapter 4, verse 1, it says this in the Targum, which is very important. And Adam knew Hava, his wife, comma, and this is the portion that is left out of the King James, who had desired the angel, semicolon. And she conceived and bare Cain, semicolon. And she said, I have acquired a man, the angel of the Lord. And she added to bear from her husband Adam, his twin, even Abel. And so that portion, well, there's a couple things that are different from the King James Version. First, the portion after, and Adam knew Hava, his wife, who had desired the angel. That's a very important verse because it was her desiring the angel and her being beguiled by the serpent, the Nakash, that actually led to the very next passage, and conceived and bare Cain. And so her having desired the angel is actually what led to the conception and her bearing Cain. And then she said, I have acquired a man, not from the Lord, but the angel of the Lord, because in our fallen states, we are actually angelic beings, but we're caught up in the flesh. And so this is what she's describing here. And then the very next verse, which it leaves out the portion, and she added to bear from her husband, Adam, and she added to bear from her husband, Adam, his twin, even Abel. And so what is being described in Genesis chapter 4, verse 1, and the reason we find it at the beginning of Genesis chapter 4, which is as chapter, is where the lineage of Cain is actually described, the 10 generations of Cain after his conception. And because he was born as a hybrid son of the devil, this is the reason we find this verse in Genesis chapter 4 and not Genesis chapter 5. Because Genesis chapter 5 is where we have the lineage of Adam being described, which in the Targums is very interesting when you study Genesis chapter 5. And I'll read that to you next. It says this. This is the book of the genealogy of man in the day that the Lord created man. In the likeness of the Lord he made him, male and female he created them, and blessed them in the name of his word. And he called their name man in the day that they were created. And Adam lived 130 years, and begat Sheth, who had the likeness of his image and of his similitude. For before had Hava born Cain, who was not like to him, and Abel was killed by his hand. And Cain was cast out, neither is his seed genealogized in the book of the genealogy of Adam, but afterwards there was one born like him, and he called his name Sheth, which even in the King James it describes with the birth of Sheth that he was born in the similitude and the likeness of Adam. And so when you understand that Cain is not born in the likeness and similitude of Adam, then it makes sense that Sheth is, as the replacement for Abel, is described as being in Adam's likeness and image because he was Adam's second son. And Cain, who was conceived because of Eve's desiring the angel, is referencing the same thing that Yeshua references in the parable of the sower, with the enemy having snuck into the garden, and that his sneaking into the garden is what responsible for sowing the tares. And so all of these things are connected in that way.
Okay, I know you've done some research into the esoteric. I don't know how far and deep you've gone, but you know about like Crowley and as far as Parsons and Hubbard and all them, that they deal with what they refer to as sexual ritual magic.
Yes.
Do you think that that ties in with what happened between the angel and Eve?
Yes. And also, too, when you look at the ancient mystery religions that go back even to the prior times, what you find is that often they give reverence, and the iconography, which even to this day and age with secret societies, they revere Lucifer as the light bringer. They worship the feathered serpent, or Baphomet, the horned goat, and also things like the lingam and the yoni, or the obelisk and the um, like the St. Peter's Basilica, the courtyard being in the shape of a keyhole, that those are representations of sexual symbols, and that in their fertility rites, their celebration of pagan rituals like Easter, with the eggs as being a fertility symbol, that the reason they worship these sexual symbols, or either that of the tree, because the most ancient symbols which were worshipped by the ancient mystery religions are the serpent, the tree, and the phallus and the ova. And all of those are connected to the beguilement of Eve and what occurred in the garden, with her being beguiled, impregnated by the serpent, and then giving birth to Cain. And so all of those mystery religions are actually celebrating that event and its occurrence, and the fact that because they are the sons of Cain, that they are giving homage to their father, the devil, just as Christ said of the Pharisees, "I know you are Abraham's seed, but you seek to kill me, and that you are of your father, the devil." He very literally meant that, because as the tares, they are the children of the wicked one. They are those that were sown by the enemy, which snuck into the garden. And so, yes, all of those things are connected to what we're talking about here. And I can even confirm this even a little bit further if you're interested in this
Yes,
particular.
Yes.
yes,
Well,
yes.
this is going to blow you away too. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but just to give you a little bit background first on the story that I'm about to share with you. There was an individual, he was a very famous DNA geneticist, and he was approached by an individual that is from one of these Illuminati families. And he was asked, well, first he told about how they were taught by their tutors and by those that had instructed them, in their private schooling, that they were different from the sons of Adam. And they confirmed that they believed that even though their ancestral mother is Eve, that their father was not Adam, but that of the serpent. And they are taught their genetics are different, and that whereas the sons of Adam have two-strand DNA, the sons of Cain are said to have three-strand DNA. And so he wanted this geneticist to confirm that there was this genetic anomaly, and that this variation actually is a genetic marker that shows a distinction between the sons of Adam and the sons of Cain. And so he wanted him to confirm this, because he wanted to know whether the sons of Cain actually had a chance to be saved or not. And so, anyways, he was murdered for bringing this information to this particular geneticist, and the geneticist was also murdered in order to keep it, hidden. But his friend had inherited it, and he was also a geneticist, and so he finished with the study. And so he's describing how here, how he inherited the work, and how he's trying to, basically he's trying to confirm um, his partners or his dead friends' investigative notes. And so he writes this. It's a little bit long, but it's absolutely worth it. You're going to be blown away by it. It says this. In his notes, my friend pins some personal thoughts after having considered his observations and the source of his DNA materials. On the plane ride back stateside, my friend, who at the time was one of the most knowledgeable DNA researchers on the planet, pulled out the biggest piece of mental jerky I've ever gnawed on. His benefactor test subject believed that while most of the sons of Adam had double-strand DNA, he had been told by his family that he and his blood relatives were distinctly different and that he, like his fathers before him, had triple-strand DNA. He wanted my friend to secretly prove once and for all if this was true or not. The subject claimed that his extended family and their cousins, who are kings, queens, princesses, and princesses, as well as leaders of industry and banking worldwide, believe they are children of an otherworldly race of humanoid beings. He'd been taught by his tutors that once upon a time his ancestors had fallen to earth after some cosmic calamity in the time before the garden. He believed that while their ancestral mother was Eve, their ancestral father was not Adam. He was torn to know if a child of Cain was actually genetically different and whether he could be saved. He thought of the Vatican's pronouncements that the aliens are our cousins, and the Vishnu teachings of a time when gods flew in spaceships and destroyed whole cities in a single blast. He even had notes about Elijah being caught up in a chariot of fire. Maybe he had misread or misunderstood the entire history of his Bible. Maybe from Genesis to Revelations, it was about some far more tangible and real fallen angel alien cousins, that the ghost-like destroying angels he'd always pictured in his, rather than the ghost-like destroying angels he'd always pictured in his imagination. It only matters what they believe, because our original subject and his relatives, who are kings, queens, princesses, and princesses, as well as leaders of industry and banking worldwide, believe and act as though they are children of an otherworldly race of humanoid beings, but not human only, hybrid human, more than human, superior alien humans. Our subject and his kin had been taught by their families and tutors that once upon a time their ancestors had fallen to earth after this cosmic calamity in the time before the garden. He believed while their ancestral mother was Eve, their ancestral father was not Adam. They believe that they are our humanoid cousins, superior hybrids, half alien and only half human. They once reigned from Olympus and were pharaohs. Whatever the real truth of their history, their belief is the driver of their actions. Being the true believers they are, they will continue to operate in accordance with their belief and the laws of alien Darwinian type survival. That's why they interbreed, to maintain the purity of their bloodline. That's why they secretly meet and connive to pass power between themselves. And that's why they must fool the rest of mankind into wars of self-destruction and debt, so that we may be forever enslaved to their lusts on this prison planet, till death do us part. More than afraid, they know in their hearts this is a fight for survival, the fight for survival. It had begun, just as my friend had said, as a murder investigation, starting with the first murder when that Luciferian demon dad had first whispered of the evil deed to his willing child Cain. It continued down through time, the sons of Adam fighting for survival and destroying the alien giants in Canaan land, David and the hybrid Goliath and his 4 hybrid brothers, and all the hidden true believers since, hiding in plain sight. So powerful, so important, yet so afraid. These earthbound half-cousins of ours continue to laugh, but it is a nervous laugh at that, as they have a joke or two at our expense, recreating their lying father's fall to earth and flashing their heretofore secret gang hand signs to each other right in our face. I know now how dangerous their beliefs are, because They are being driven by their beliefs, taught to them by their real alleged father, the father of lies. And even now, even now, he knows the truth and whispers in his initiate's ears, just as he had first did in Cain's ear. The sons of Adam, as long as they live, they are dangerous.
Whoa.
Nice.
Heavy, huh?
That's good.
Extremely. Wow. Zen, you're just throwing us for a loop tonight, I'll tell you.
Yeah, 'cause
Uh,
we're usually not this speechless.
No.
Promise you that.
well, I tell you that, awakening up to this truth, it should leave you speechless because, it's mind blowing, absolutely mind blowing.
I've got to tell you, Zen, that something you said too, and just a few minutes ago, and with this, it made all these light bulbs start popping in my head. And it ties to the Vatican, and I believe it's called the throne room, where they have
Uh-huh.
this massive tree behind their seats. And up in the middle of that tree, coming out of the top, is Jesus and the serpent.
Uh-huh.
And that just tied it all. I'd never entertained that thought before.
Right. Well, that is depicting the war, just like it says in, Matthew chapter 13, that this is a war between those bloodlines, and that the wheat are the children of the Son of Man, and the tares are the children of the wicked one. And this is the ongoing war that has been continuous since even the war in heaven, because it was Yeshua's seat, the dominion over the upper heavens that Lucifer wanted. He wanted to be as the Most High, and so he wanted to be, the leader and ruler over all of the angels, which Yeshua, the Father and the Son, are. And so he was jealous of the Son, and so this war began with, the war in heaven and his being cast out. He was cast out of the heavens by the word of God. And so this war has been ongoing since that time. It's continuous even now between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And even in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, that was the oldest prophecy. And this is something that is also mind blowing, where it talks about the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, how the serpent would nip at his heel, and the seed of the woman would crush the skull of the serpent. Well, this is how that was fulfilled. When Yeshua was crucified on the cross, that in, he was crucified in a place called Calvary, which is also known as the Hill of the Skull. And the reason it is known as the Hill of the Skull, it also is called Golgotha. When you look up that particular word, Golgotha, it means Goliath of Gath. And what happened was, when David, as a shepherd boy, went and stood up to the challenge of Goliath when the Philistine armies were basically mocking them and mocking the Hebrew Israelites. He used his sling stone and stunned Goliath, and then ran up to him and used his own sword and cut off his head. Well, because nobody would believe that this shepherd boy had succeeded in killing the Philistine champion, who was a real and literal giant, 6-fingered, 6-toed, double sets of teeth, massive in stature, more so than regular humans. And so he cut off his head and brought his head back as a trophy to the people of Jerusalem, and showed them Goliath's head to prove that he had literally succeeded in slaughtering their champion. Well, the other part of that story is that after after he had paraded it and showed it to the people, he had buried it in that place called the Hill of the Skull, where Yeshua was crucified when he had died on the cross. And so very literally, when he was crucified on the cross, he was standing and basically standing, crushing the head of the serpent, which Goliath, being a seed of the serpent, his head was buried in the landscape, and his head, his skull, was nipping at the heels of Yeshua at the same time that he was crushing the head of the serpent. And so Genesis 3:15, where it describes the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, that Christ had crushed the serpent's skull and finished the war as far as the flesh, the war against Satan, because when he died on the cross, he brought to us salvation, and he gave, through his shedding of his blood as the Passover lamb, he gave and brought forgiveness of sins to all of humanity, and even to the children of Cain who were before then totally excluded from the rewards of salvation. But afterwards, they were extended in similarity. As long as they, follow the commandments and live in the example of Christ and accept His saving grace, because we have some of these, even this individual who was who had hired this geneticist to determine whether the sons of Cain, the genetics were different, and if they could be saved. That there are individuals like John Todd and my friend Carolyn Hamlet and others that have come out of these Illuminati families that have accepted Christ as Savior Messiah and that know Him as Lord and King. And in my opinion, even though they were born into these Illuminati bloodlines as the children of Cain, the children of perdition, they do, because of their being born again in Christ and accepting Him and the grace that He has extended to all of us, that they will be counted and numbered among the elect, at least some of them. And so his dying on the cross actually, it finished the war, and his being defeated death, and like the sting of death, where is thy victory, where is thy glory? And so his ascending to the right hand of the Father confirm that He is King and Lord, and that even death and He has power over death and over the fallen angels, namely Satan, the rebel angels, and the fallen watchers, the powers, the principalities, the rulers of darkness, wickedness on high places, that they have nothing on Him, that He is the real King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and that when He comes again in His second coming, that then the war will be over. Even though He already has the victory, when He returns in His second coming, the war, the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent will be finished forevermore.
Amen.
Amen. Okay, I got to go here with you on this because you're one of these type people that's just a plethora of knowledge, so I got to go there with you. I know that you probably know about Dr. Michael Heiser's work about the the spiritual geography and all that. Are you familiar with that? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What are your thoughts when Jesus went out of His way and took His disciples over there, basically by the gates of Hades, the Temple of Pan, and that Mount Hermon was also right there when He was having the conversation with His disciples and asking, who do people say that I am? Why He was specifically doing that and taking them there and doing all that right there.
Well, I don't know as far as what Dr. Heiser has said about this. All I can say is that maybe the reason he did that right there is to show that He is the true creator, and just as it says in John chapter 1, and that He's not like unto these other pagan gods, and the pantheon of the gods and goddesses that all of these cultures and the pre-Adamic peoples worship, because they are the false gods. They are His angels who were banished out of the heavens, whom He had cast out and banished and exiled here to the earth. And so in my mind, he is showing his authority as the creator, because he was not created, even though he incarnated and came in, was born of woman, and that he took on flesh in order to redeem us. He pre-existed with the Father. They are unborn. They were never, they are never, were never created. Even the angels were created, and Satan was created. All the rebel angels, they were created, and being cast out, and having established themselves as these pagan gods and goddesses, they have attempted to thwart the worship of humanity and to deceive everybody into basically giving them that reverence, which is, again, Isaiah chapter 14, Lucifer's attempt to exalt himself above the stars and the stars and the clouds of God, and to be as the Most High. And even, it talks about him as being the morning star. Well, Yeshua is the original morning star, as it says in Revelation. And that Lucifer and all the other angels that are parading themselves as gods and goddesses, that they are not God, because, they never could be God. They're created beings. Even though they're angelic and they're immortal and bright natured, they are still created beings. God was never made by anybody. They pre-existed all of creation.
So do you believe that the angel of the Lord was actually Jesus before he became in the flesh?
I do believe that, and also the word of the Lord, and that what you have um, being reflected in many of these different, in the extra biblical and extra canonical text, is relationship with Yeshua before he incarnated in the flesh form, and that we have um, relationship that the elder patriarchs and the prophets of old had relationship with him previous, even like in Jeremiah, chapter 1, verse 4 and 5, where it says the word of the Lord went to Jeremiah, and he's told him, I knew you before you ever entered into the womb of your mother. I had ordained you to be a prophet unto the nations. That same thing applies to all of us, because we all existed and pre-existed as spiritual beings before we ever came into flesh form, which is a whole another topic and story that we'll get into at some point. But in Ephesians chapter 1, it talks about us having been predestinated, and that this teaching is also connected to Romans chapter 9 and Malachi chapter 1, where it speaks about Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. How does that make any kind of sense, that the Most High God, who's supposed to be a just and compassionate and loving God, could hate a child that had not yet even been born to commit in any way any kind of sin?
And it's interesting that you bring that up, because the whole story of Jacob and Esau pretty much mirrors the whole story of Cain and Abel.
Exactly. And Isaac and Ishmael.
Yep.
It's the same thing. The Ishmael and Esau and Cain are all the children of perdition. And Abel, well, even though he was murdered by his half brother, but Seth and Isaac and Jacob are the seed of promise. And also notice that they were the second born, and that the firstborn, they gave up their birthright, and that they were trumped by the youngers.
The ones that were human.
Yes, exactly, the seed of promise.
Well, if I remember right, Abel he was considered a prophet.
Yes, he was, and there are other stories that talk about him as such, and also Adam was a prophet, priest, and king. But um, when they, well, not him in particular, even though he was in a fallen state and was tempted and did commit sin, but by the time of Noah's generation, uh, Noah is considered, and his family, well, not even all of his family, because his wife Nama and Ham, they were of the line of Cain, but he was considered pure in his generations. But everybody else had gone the way of Cain. And which is interesting because, like, if you read in the first book of Adam and Eve, you have recounted over and over where each one of the patriarchs from Adam's lineage, all the way to the time of Yared, Enoch, Lamech, Methuselah, and then Noah, whenever they're about to die or pass away, they tell them to not allow their children to go down and to mix with the children of Cain, or to have anything to do with their bloodline or their seed line, to stay away from them and to keep separate. But by the time of Noah, all of them besides Noah had left their holy mountain and had gone and slept with the daughters of Cain, and took wives of them and corrupted their own integrity and their purity.
Wow.
That's a heavy story.
It is, man. It really is. And you're just laying it on for everybody. And they can easily go and research everything you're saying and find that it's pretty valid.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I implore people to do so. Even though I, make all my work available freely in radio broadcasts, and I've done hundreds of shows covering the entirety of every aspect and every angle of this story, from beginning to end. It's so much, and it's so all encompassing that it really takes several years, even a decade, to thoroughly research in the way that it should be researched. But once you commit yourself to it and you study, everything that you study will repeat the scenario and the story that I'm unveiling to you right now. And I know that, a lot of people don't want to believe it and are not willing to even open themselves to the possibility of it. And that, a lot of people are King James Version only. But even with just the King James, as I lay out in my book, Lucifer, Father of Cain, and also the Sons of God, this story is absolutely encoded and revealed within just that foundational text. But that when you study the extra biblical and the extra canonical text, well, you are bombarded with information which confirms this from every angle. Like in both of my books, I have over 200 source references, quotations from all different kinds of scriptures, and all kind of lost in, forgotten books, some that people have never even heard of. Even books like the Colburn Bible, which was only released in 2006, it also has this information encoded within it, which is, absolutely mind-blowing. The Nag Hammadi codices, which were only recently discovered in 1945 and were preserved by the Most High for thousands of years out there in the middle of the desert, they also have encoded within them all of this information. The Targums, when I discovered the Targums, which are the Aramaic translations of the original Hebrew Torah, they also have all of this information affirmed within it, as I shared with you in those 3 verses. And so it's absolutely mind-blowing, the amount of information which confirms this as truth.
Okay, we got to ask you this. This is something me and Kay both are dying to know. How did you come to the conclusion about the serpent seed, and what led you to start looking into this?
Well, the first thing was that it didn't make sense to me that Eve eating fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that first they would cover their genitals, and that next it would lead to her being pregnant and giving birth to a child, Cain. And then Cain being of different nature, why it was that if they are innocent, both she and Adam were innocent and the first human beings, and they had never witnessed murder or anything schizoid or evil like that, how it was that all of a sudden he had these characteristics and that he personified, um, he was the first murderer, liar, and deceiver, as he is referenced in Scripture. And that to me sounded more like in characteristic to what we know of as Satan, as the evil one. And so when I started to look, and, as I said, I was just reading all of the extra biblical texts, but everywhere, as I lay out in my fourth book, Lucifer Father Cain, there's over 200 source references from not just the foundation of the canon, but all of the extra biblical texts. Even like I'll share with you, like the Kebra Nagas, where, I was doing a lot of research on the fallen angels and had studied in that chapter 1 about the watchers sleeping with the daughters of Cain. Well, in chapter 3, it says this: and at that sorrowful moment, Cain was born, and when Adam saw that the face of Cain was ill-tempered or sullen and his appearance evil, he was sad. So it's discussing how Cain was of different nature than Adam. And there's other passages like in the book of Enoch, in chapter 9, it says this: and I saw the spirits of the sons of men who were dead, and their voices reached to heaven while they were accusing. Then I inquired of Raphael, an angel who was with me, and said, whose spirit is that, the voice of which reaches to heaven and accuses? He answered, saying, this is the spirit of Abel, who was slain by Cain, his brother, and who will accuse that brother until his seed be destroyed from the face of the earth, until his seed perish from the seed of the human race. And so when I understood, after reading the Targums, when I understood that it was Eve's desiring the angel that led to the conception of Cain, then all of these things fell into place, clicked into place, and I wanted to study it more and more. And so I started reading everything, and I found it confirmed in so many different places. I mean, over and over and over. I mean, the evidence is so overwhelming. How anybody can deny this as revelation is just absolutely beyond me.
Okay, and I got another one for you here. We need you to also talk about, there was another person that lives close by you that was also led to do the same research and reach the same conclusions as you.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. This was the most beautiful thing. Yes, this was the most incredible thing, because when I was studying this and I began to do rodeo shows and I wrote my book on this, there were not a lot of people out there talking about this in any kind of way. But I discovered the work of my friend Dr. Joy Jeffries Pugh, who I heard on an interview that she did with Daniel Ott on the Edge radio broadcast, where she had mentioned also in that broadcast that Cain was the child of the serpent. And so I reached out to her, and she agreed to do an interview with me, which was amazing to me, because, here she is, PhD, doctorate. She had written a very well-respected and well-read book called Eden, The Knowledge of Good and Evil, 666. And so when we came together, and she lives here in Georgia as well, in Valdosta, I live near Athens, Georgia, we got together and did a series, like 3 different videos together where we talked about this, and we basically just were bouncing back and forth off of each other in discussing this and all of this information. We kept bringing up all of this information. Her having only studied this from the King James, from the canon, and my being very well versed and very well researched in the extra biblical text, we were able to put those things together and to confirm this in many, many dozens and even, I would say hundreds of ways now. And so she was a complete blessing for my life, and I was for hers. And just recently she released it, and we're both published through Tape Publishing as well. but she just recently released a 3-book series called Beguiled from Eden to Armageddon, and basically is connecting in fullness what we are describing and talking about over the course of this show. And she covers the seed of the serpent from the garden, from Eden to Armageddon, which is, the second coming of Yeshua and the harvest, and speaks about it in full summation in the same way that I do, just from again, she's only a King James version, having studied it in that way, and she approaches it that way and writes about it in that way. And I, of course, bring in all of these extra biblical texts, which I'll share one other passage with you, which is, is absolutely in my mind total confirmation for the things that we're talking about. This is from the Gospel of Philip, and it says this: "He who has been created is beautiful, but you would not find his son's noble creations. If he were not created but begotten, you would find that his seed was noble. But now he was created and he begot. What nobility is this? First adultery came into being, afterward murder. And he was begotten in adultery, for he was the child of the serpent. And so he became a murderer, just like his father, and he killed his brother." Now I'm going to break down this particular passage for you, because when you understand it, there's no denying that Satan is the father of Cain. When the first two verses, "He who has been created is beautiful, but you would not find his son's noble creations." Remember, the angels are created beings. They were not begotten of woman. And so this verse is talking about an angel, an angelic being, Lucifer being a created angel. Remember, he was the most beautiful, described in Eden, in Ezekiel chapter 28 as being the most beautiful. And it was because of his vanity that iniquity was, later found within him. But anyways, so he who has been created, this is Lucifer, is beautiful, but you would not find his son's noble creations. Why would you not find his son's noble creation? Next line. "If he were not created but begotten, you would find that his seed was noble," meaning that if he were not a created being, not an angelic being, but begotten of woman, then when he mated with Eve or with any other woman, he would have had regular human children, and his children would have been noble. But because he is a created being and not begotten, when he beguiled Eve, and impregnated her with Cain, when Cain was born, he was not noble because he was a hybrid child. So continuing. "If he were not created but begotten, you would find that his seed was noble. But now he was created and he begot. What nobility is this?" And so it's referencing what happened in the garden. Him being a created being, but now he was created and he begot, meaning that he, being an angelic being, he still had children, which is again referencing him as the enemy which snuck into the garden and that sowed the tares. And so it continues. What nobility is this? It's not noble, because the result of that was in the next line. First adultery came into being. This is his beguilement of Eve while she was still a chaste virgin, which is also referenced in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3 by Paul, when he speaks about the serpent beguiling Eve. And so adultery came into being. First, adultery came into being, and then afterward, murder. And so, adultery, he seduced Eve, impregnated her with Cain, and after Cain was born, then he committed the first murder. And then the next line, "And he was begotten in adultery," referencing Cain, because it was because of his adulterous affair with Eve that she was impregnated Cain, and he was born, begotten. For he was the child of the serpent. And so he became a murderer just like his father, and he killed his brother. And so, I mean, how can you deny that? How can you deny that that is connected in every way? When you decipher its passages, its text, then it totally alludes to what happened in the garden, and that Lucifer, being a created being, that he indeed is the father of Cain, and that Cain, as it says, was the child of the serpent. I mean, it can't be any more clear than that.
That helps explain the verse in the Bible that says that we are all born out of sin.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And the sin, and where it says that he became a murderer like his father, it was his tempting Eve and Adam and causing them to lose their immortal bright nature that brought death into being. That's why he is called the angel of death. And so he is a murderer. He's responsible for murdering all of us because we, as angelic pre-existent beings, are now being birthed into the flesh, and we eventually die.
Oh man, we've got to have you back on for more shows. You know that, right?
Oh yeah, certainly, anytime.
Okay. Now, at this point, definitely want you to plug everything where people can find you, where they can get your books. Plug away, man.
Sure. You can contact me at zengarcia.com. That's my author website. I'm the webmaster for fallenangels.tv, not .com, not .org, but .tv. And you can also contact me at Zen Garcia on Facebook. As I said, I have my third through my ninth book are available right now. A Different Way of Being, my third one, my fourth, Lucifer, Father of Cain, my fifth, Awaken to the New World Order, my sixth, Sons of God, Who We Are and Why We're Here, my seventh, Skyfall, Angels of Destiny, which is all about pre-existence and our being predestinated. My eighth is the Aramaic Targums, published in English. And my ninth is the Flat Earth as Key to Decrypt the Book of Enoch. And my 10th that I'm working on now, which should be available in about 3 months, is the Firmament, the Vaulted Dome of the Earth. And if you're interested in more than one book, just contact me and I'll be glad to provide you a discount, bundle them together. I have both hardbacks and softbacks available, and I will also autograph them free of charge, personalize them to you or to your loved one or family member if you want to give them as a birthday present or a Christmas present or whatever. That I'll be glad to do that also free of charge.
And I highly recommend you definitely check his books out. Highly recommend.
And I'd also like to say that there, the interview that Zen does with Joy Pugh, it's available on YouTube. I've watched it multiple times. It's in different sections, but all together. You're going to want to watch that. It is fascinating to hear them, the interchange between both of them, and it's good. And Zen, you have
Yeah.
been wonderful. I mean,
Yes.
this has been absolutely fascinating, and I want to thank you again.
Well, it's my honor, and I appreciate the opportunity to come on and to share some of these things with with yourselves and with your listening audience, because these are things that are not very well or not spoken about very often by many people at all. And as far as Dr. Joy, yes, she is confirming witness to this information, and I've done a number of interviews with a lot of people now. Even Timothy Alberino and I did a interview just recently where we talked about
Yes.
these things, and
Mm-hmm.
that was an amazing interview as well. But as far as Dr. Joy and I, we've done probably 20 interviews together, and so all of those are freely available on YouTube. You just have to, recognize the different ones that we've done, and we cover in great many aspects all of the information that I've shared and, basically just kind of glossed over, because in my books, I write about these things in great detail. And as I said, all of these source references are available for the reader, the student, and the seeker of truth in regard to all of this. And you can go and study them in their own context, in the extra biblical books where I had pulled them from, and also the canon of the Bible. That once you understand this as revelation, as I said, it is a skeleton key for unlocking so much of what is misunderstood, and even why the prophets and the patriarchs kept detailed records of whom begot whom, and who fathered who, and what son was born of what son. The reason they did so, even though it seems absolutely tedious to us, is because they are giving detailed record of these two bloodlines and lineages throughout all of history, and how Yeshua, being born of the seed of the woman, he would be born of this pure bloodline of the sons of Adam, and have none of the children of Cain to taint him and corrupt him, which is what Lucifer indeed tried to do.
Well, Zen, would you like to do the honor of saying tonight's closing prayer for us?
Sure. I just first I give all honor, praise, glory, and thanksgiving to the Most High God, to the Father and the Son, for all the blessings, even our chance and ability to come together in fellowship this way, and to openly discuss and share discourse over the gospel secrets, which in my mind he is absolutely pouring out the Spirit upon all flesh. And these are just some of the revelations he has shared with me in utilizing me as an instrument, as a servant, as a foot washer unto humanity. That my goal, my mission, my role here is to help you as a reader, as a seeker of lost paradise, to make sense of the scriptures in a way that may not ever have been even thought of or conceived of being able to understand them in this way. And that I pray that the Most High open all of your eyes, and I pray that you each will do your own homework in confirming these revelations for yourself and make them your own personal truth. And I pray that he blesses all of us so that we can continue in fellowship and be confirming and affirming witnesses for one another, so that we can learn from each other, broaden our horizons further in understanding the secrets that are contained with not only the canon, but in the many extra biblical and extra canonical texts, which I affirm are absolutely inspired. Of course, not all of them. There has absolutely been disinformation and scriptures that have been put out in order to dissuade and to lead astray humanity. But there are a lot of things out there, like the Book of Enoch and Jasher and Jubilees, which are confirming witness to the gospel account. And when read, they provide extra detail, just as what the Targums convey in understanding. And these are the things that he wants all of us to be able to grasp in coming to understand and to make sense of where we are in the world. Because right now, most of the world is blind to the war that is going on behind the scenes, and who, as the New World Order, that the sons of Cain are ruling from the shadows, and how they, being Oz behind the mask, that this is why the chaos ensues and why things are as they are. When really, if we were all of one people and we were all concerned with raising our children in goodness and bringing them up in beauty and harmony, things like war and just the decimation of peoples and the slaughter of innocents, all that should have disappeared. I mean, we should have evolved beyond all that. But this war is going to be ongoing until Yeshua comes again. And the most important aspect of all of the things that we're talking about now is that indeed soon, our being the fig tree generation, that the Most High is coming again very soon. And so I pray that all of us be given the eyes to see, the ears to hear, and a mind to understand, so that we can know that the Gospels are indeed divinely inspired, and that in that way we also know that all of the prophecies that are therein laid out are true, and that we are made in the image of our Maker, and that our Father and the Son, they want us to seek out personal relationship with them, and to have and take part in the eternal inheritance, the salvation that He so graciously extends to each one of us as being, here lost in the flesh in this fallen prison planet world. And so with that, again, I give all thanks, honor, praise, and blessing to the Most High God for even chance and opportunity to be part of existence and to play out, to wake out each day to new role and new goal and new day and new opportunity and new chance and new choice. And may we follow out and live the will that He has led and established for our lives. And may we be worthy of being numbered and counted among the elect. And in Yeshua, in the Father and the Son's name, I pray.
In Jesus'
Amen.
name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you again, Zen, and I want to thank everyone for
9 books, but I'm working on my 10th one right now. And I also do 2 radio broadcasts, one on Wednesday evening, 8 to 10 p.m. on Revolution Radio, which can be found at freedomslips.com, and one on Saturday, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern on truthfrequencyradio.com. And my books, the ones that I have available, I'll mention the first 2. Look Somewhere Different and When the Evening Dies, but those are sold out. And my third one, A Different Way of Being. My fourth, Lucifer, Father of Cain. My fifth, Awaken to the New World Order. My sixth, Sons of God, Who We Are and Why We Are Here. My seventh, Skyfall, The Angels of Destiny. My eighth, the Palestinian and Aramaic Targums. And my ninth one, The Flat Earth as Key to Decrypt the Book of Enoch. And the one that I'm working on now is The Firmament, the Vaulted Dome of the Earth.
Nice.
yes, they all sound interesting. Well, Chad, I know that you had some ideas where you wanted to start tonight. Would you like to go ahead and take off with that?
Yeah, I was hoping that maybe Zen could start out talking a little bit about the whole pre-Adamic and lead us into the serpent seed.
Yeah, sure, because they actually tie together, and they are both keys for unlocking so much that is hidden within Scripture, in my opinion. Um, and so, going back to the pre-Adamic age, I think we should first start with the worn heaven and the passages within Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, which speak about the earth being without form and void, and that when you look at the Strong's Concordance meaning of tohu wabohu, which are the Hebrew words for without form and void, it basically is describing the earth being a ruinous heap. And so something had led to the earth becoming a ruinous heap. And individuals like George H. Pember, in his book, The Earth's Earliest Ages, he ascribes in similarity to a belief that within those 2 verses there is what is referenced as the gap theory, which basically asserts that there was a previous era, a time, an epoch which had occurred before the earth became without form and void, and that something had indeed led to it becoming destroyed in the manner that is presented within that verse, and that what is described afterwards in Genesis 1, 2, and forward to Genesis chapter 2 is the recreation and the reformation of the ruined earth. And so it also mentions in chapter 2 that there was a time when there was not yet rain, and there was not a man um, created to till the ground. And in my belief, and what I'm currently writing about, is that in Genesis chapter 2, it's a flashback to this previous age, and that there are other verses like Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 23 through 28, I believe, where Jeremiah describes um, a time when there was not yet man, but all these cities of the wilderness were destroyed by the fury of the Most High God. And also in Ezekiel chapter 26, in the latter portion, describing the destruction, the judgment that is going to be brought upon the city of Tyre, both the mainland city and also the island city, New Tyre, which is about a mile or so off of the mainland, and it's an island out in the sea. It describes in that passage how they will have a judgment brought against them where the island will be destroyed and drowned and will no longer be able to be found. And it attributes that destruction in similarity to something that had happened to a previous seafaring people, and that in a very olden time, and that in my mind it seems to connect to the mythology of Atlantis and the destruction which was incurred in Atlantis, which drowned it and made it disappear so that it could not even be found even to this current day and age. Even though there are megalithic structures which are being discovered in places like in the bottom of the ocean, like in Cuba, there are pyramidal structures being cited as being located and discovered there. Places like Yonaguni off the coast of Japan, which is a huge megalithic site, which has been well explored, but is at the bottom of the ocean. And another place off of the coast of India called Dwarka, which in the Hindu mythology was a city that was drowned and disappeared over 30,000 years ago. And the fact that they are at the bottom of the ocean is also affirmation to how long ago these events and these cities had to have been constructed, because this was at a time when the sea levels were very much different than they are now. And so if science is correct, and that there was a glacial age, and that when the earth began to warm up and all of that ice melted, that's what resulted in the sea levels rising. um, However it was that it occurred, those cities had to have been constructed at a very long time ago, at a very advanced age, going back into the past, because they are located at the bottom of the oceans, and that the oceans now have inundated them and drowned them and kept them hidden um, until recently, in even just the last few decades.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Deception Detection Radio. I'm Kay.
And I'm Chad.
We pray you all had a blessed week. Tonight we are welcoming a very special guest, Zen Garcia. Zen is the author of 10 books and is also the webmaster for the truth-seeking network, fallenangels.com. Zen is executive producer for Endeavor Freedom Incorporated, executive producer for Endeavor Freedom TV, and chairman of the board for Multiple Choices, an Athens, Georgia area center for independent living. We would like to welcome our brother in Christ, Zen Garcia. Welcome, Zen.
Thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate the opportunity to join with you and your listening audience to discuss all things esoteric and go down the rabbit hole and trying to help people to decipher the illusion parading as reality.
That sounds good. We really appreciate you taking the time to come on. I'm going to go ahead and say the opening prayer, and then we'll get right into it. Are you ready, Zen and Chad?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Dear Heavenly Father, this has been a wonderful week. You have given us so many blessings. Thank you for bringing us all together tonight and our listeners. And we thank you so much, Lord, for all you do, for standing with us when we go through these difficult times, and for showing us just your power and your glory in everything that we see and we do. We do it all for your glory, Lord, because we love you. We love you so much, and we give you praise for everything because you loved us first. Please place a hedge of protection, Lord, around all of our listeners, around Zen, Chad, and myself, and open the ears of the listeners so that they may hear your word and soften their heart to have your words go into their heart, Lord, that they can keep them. Please let your word touch everyone and lead tonight's broadcast, Father. I ask you this in Jesus' holy and mighty name. Amen.
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 Then, welcome to Deception Detection Radio. Could you please tell our audience a little bit about you if they're not familiar with you?
Yes, but let me first inform you that I'm no longer working as an advocacy director with Endeavor Freedom. I do still am involved with the nonprofit, but I have since turned it over to another board, and I'm not currently um, the chairman of the board for multiple choices as well. I've
I
now
apologize.
just oh yeah, no, it's just yeah, those are hats that I did wear when I was greatly involved in the political system. But since having learned, basically that the whole two-party system is contrived and that elections are, basically fabricated, I've decided to put my efforts more into exposing that kind of deception and focused on writing books and doing radio programs, which is what I endeavor most of my time with now. And that being said, I am the author of Gates, and so there are also other structures which are being discovered. But all of this, in my mind, is evidence to um, judgments that were levied and brought upon the rebel angels, and that what even led them to be banished here to the earth was that there was this previous war in heaven, and that this is when Lucifer, as it says in Isaiah chapter 14 and also in Ezekiel chapter 28, he wanted to exalt himself above the stars and clouds of God um, to to take the throne of the Most High God and to be like the Most High. And that this is, in my opinion, the moment which iniquity was found within him. And in the second book of Enoch, the book of the secrets of Enoch, it mentions his being cast out of the heavens on what is the second day, which I think is very relevant and is something that I'm writing about even right now in talking about the firmament, because according to Genesis's order of creation, the first 4 days, when you go and you study um, the description of the creative process of how the earth and the heavens came into its current state and form, on the first day, with the earth being null and void, or being without form and void, it is reestablished as foundation, and then on the second day, the firmament is spread across its breadth. It divides the waters from above from the waters below, and it's established as a dome, a canopy, a heavenly curtain, and fitted to that of the circle of the earth as described in Isaiah chapter 40 and also in Proverbs chapter 8, where it talks about a circle being inscribed on the waters of the deep, and that this is the earth as a flat circular plane, and that this is the structure which the dome, which is also referenced or in inferenced as being a solid structure. That when you look up the word firmament, it comes up as the word rakia, which means a solid vault, arch domed structure, a canopy, the heavenly canopy, which was put in place above the earth. And then on the third day, the waters of the deep, um, the mountains are separated, and the earth, the dry land appears, meaning that the earth is brought upwards from what is sea level, and then the continental land masses appear, and that is the topography for which all of the on the fifth day the grasses, the trees, and all the vegetation uh, take hold upon. But on the fourth day, you have the heavenly luminaries, the celestial luminaries, including the sun, the moon, and the stars, being created and placed into the firmament of um, beneath the firmament, beneath the solid dome structure of the heavens. And they have their circuit above the earth, as Solomon states 29 times in the book of Ecclesiastes, that all is folly under the sun, and that the sun and the moon and the heavenly stars, they all have circuit and maintain circuit in within the firmament above the earth and around Polaris as the fixed star, as the center point, much like the North Pole is for the plane of the earth. That Polaris is the fixed star for the movement and the motions of the celestials during the night. And so this is what we see spoken of as far as the prior times, because when the angels, the rebel angels, are cast out of the heavens on the second day, they are banished here to the earth, and they are no longer allowed to go into the upper heavens, but they are banned to the circle of the earth. And then it's my opinion that the firmament was established and put into place after their exile here to the earth as containment, as way to prevent them from being able to escape the upcoming judgment. Just as Legion responded to Christ when he cast them out into the swine, they asked him if he had come to punish them before the time. And so they know that they have a certain amount of time left, and that when that time is up, they will be banished. But so they're being banished here to the earth, and this all occurred before the modern creation of Adam and Eve on the sixth day. But so between the second and the sixth day, you have the angels already exiled and cast out, the rebel angels, Lucifer and the 1/3 of the angels of the Most High that joined him in insurrection. They are banned here to the earth with the pre-Adamic humans that were in existence as part of the natural order and the natural creation, with all of the other creatures that were established before Adam and that were placed here to inhabit the earth. And so even in the Sumerian mythologies, you see the accounts of their trying to enslave humanity and to try to, and it's referencing pre-Adamic humanity, but also even now their aspirations are to establish this new world order and to dominate with a one world system, um, this, all of humanity and to enslave us to their whims and their desires. And so this is nothing new. They've been attempting to do these kind of things for a very long time. But anyways, this is why you see in the ancient mythologies the account of all of these old elder cultures and the different indigenous peoples. They have the mythologies of